Hope everybody's feeling energized. You got a little espresso or some coffee at lunch, and you're ready to jump into an afternoon of even more exciting panels and discussions. We'll be talking on the next panel about something near and dear to my heart: diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the changing landscape around supporting underrepresented founders. How many of you in the audience have heard about the Fearless Fund lawsuit? I hope everyone, some of the pushback around diversity programs aren't sure about what comes next. So this panel will really be talking about just that. As a founder of a startup that focuses on doing diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion trainings in workplaces across the country, I know firsthand what the landscape looks like and the uphill battle that we're facing. And we're still in this fight. In the past decade, a majority of ventures that have passed through Halcyon's doors are led or co-led by women and founders of color. We can clap for that. I'm excited to hear from these next panelists because they're experts and they have a lot to say about the current conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI for short, and what can be done to continue to support these underrepresented founders.
It's a pleasure to meet you all. My name is Kwasi Mitchell. I am Chief Purpose and DEI Officer with Deloitte. And as many of you know, the US has seen an incredible growth in entrepreneurship since the pandemic, specifically with women and people of color leading the charge and starting businesses at the highest levels in decades. However, these groups still lack access to resources, receiving less than 2% of venture capital. Organizations supporting these groups have recently been challenged in court amidst a broader questioning of DEI efforts across all sectors. Now, today, we're going to spend a few moments just talking about that changing landscape and how to support underserved founders and frameworks for action. Now, before I turn it over to the panelists, I do want to issue a complaint to Dan Barker, right? Because just so you all know, I had Dan come and speak to my team. I gave him a prime real estate spot, made him the center of attention. And what he has done is put me after lunch, after you all have fallen asleep, and then had me moderate a panel of leaders substantially more prestigious than I am. So just to say, if any of you could, on your way out, could just make sure that Dan knows that's just not right. So, but with that, I would love for you to introduce yourselves.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. And thank you so much for the invitation, and to my esteemed moderator, quite esteemed. My name is Kylie Patterson. I'm the Deputy Assistant to President Biden for Racial Justice and Equity at the White House, and formerly a Chief Opportunity and Inclusion Officer for CHIPS for America. That's the Microchip Manufacturing Incentives Program of $52 billion. In fact, we announced, I think, that here some time ago at Georgetown. But most importantly, I am someone who's fiercely committed to economic opportunities for everyone. And that's the good work that we're doing right now at the White House. And I look forward to the conversation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is JaNay Nazaire, and I'm so happy to be with these beautiful people. I am the co-founder and CEO of Grvty. We exist to make it normal for people to be wealthy and well. I come from academia and philanthropy, and I found capital. And so I like to integrate those folks because we believe that everyone can have a richer future. So excited to have this conversation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Choi. I am a partner at the law firm of Baker Botts. My practice focuses primarily on government investigations. So I'm really the kind of person that no one wants to see coming or talk to ever. And I'm also my firm's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. So I'm incredibly honored and excited to be part of this conversation today as well.
And you all see what I mean about Dan put me to moderate a panel with 3 people who are substantially more prestigious than I am. So again, thank you, Dan. But Kylie, wanted to start with you. Given your role with the U.S. Minority Business Development Agency, And in your current role with the White House, how can the U.S. government create equitable outcomes for businesses? How can the government contribute to creating an equal playing field for minority business owners?
Sure. So let me take you back a little bit. Some of you may not be familiar with the U.S. Department of Commerce and its agency, the Minority Business Development Agency. This agency was first stood up as executive order under, can anyone guess? President Nixon. All right. And I think that's important, right? Because when we talk about opportunities for minority and Black-owned businesses, it's without party, right? It's about really looking at the economic realities that we want everyone to thrive, because when everyone thrives, we all do better. Now, that being said, what can the federal government do? So it began with a little bit of his action, and this became this question of what are the resources and the tools with which the federal government can support and advance Black-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses. Well, we don't make really money in the federal government, but we certainly spend it, right? When you talk about our federal Department of Defense, for instance, et cetera, and we are the largest procurer in the world. So with that, that's an awesome opportunity for us to think about how we can expand opportunities and support these businesses. And in fact, under President Biden's leadership, we are increasing our small disadvantaged business spend by 50%. And already we have been able to increase our spend with Black-owned small disadvantaged businesses by $800 million since 2020. And this past year, we spent over $10 billion. I remember talking to a young woman, and I said to her, when I say young, I mean like 7. And I said to her, and I said,
Legit young woman.
young woman. And I asked her how many zeros were in a billion, and she told me. And I said, do you have that many? And and she said, I have all of those. And I said, with a number in front. And she was like, oh, I don't have that, right? And when we talk about billions, I think we need to put a face to that. Many solo entrepreneurs, many Black-owned businesses are actually making far less than $1 billion. They're making, on average, just enough to pay for their own lifestyle. And so for that reason, the work of expanding procurement opportunities in the federal government is keenly important, and it's a key part of our work. The other area, and I'll stop with this, is that it's also about access to capital. And you're going to hear more about this from my panelists. But in terms of the federal government, that looks like providing access to capital via loans. And we have been able to triple the lending to Black-owned businesses under this administration. But that's just the beginning, right? Because at the end of the day, having worked with small businesses for some time, they'll tell me a loan is great, but a contract is better. So we have more to do, but that's the work right now.
And what I love about, so many of the different aspects of what you've just said is you talk about the government and its spending. It's also something that I think is sitting in my role within the private sector that I feel is equally important, right? Because from my standpoint, if you truly want to know what an organization believes in, where they spend their money is what truly tells you that. And so investing in businesses, and again, not loans, not grants and things of that nature, but contracts so they can deliver the services that they know how to do so well.
That's right.
So JaNay, we'll talk a little bit about venture capital and again, it was amazing sitting in the back talking to JaNay about like her phenomenal career. But like now that you spend this time with VC, it struggled to get beyond that 2% mark in terms of access to funding for women and people of color. Can you speak to the efforts that you're leading with Grvty and how it's contributing to move the needle with respect to capital? And how is it changing in the current landscape?
Sure. So just a couple of things to situate what's happening in our economy. Citibank did a study and they said that we lost 16 trillion in GDP because we didn't close economic inequality gaps in housing, education, wages, and investment. Okay. So that's money just left on the table. So if you're sitting at lunch with your friends and there's a pile of money in the middle and everybody walks away, that's essentially what we did because we didn't close the gaps. And those gaps were, again, driven by race and class and some other things. And so one of those was investments. So when we've looked at the landscape, we did find that like only, it was actually 1.4%. If I appreciate the roundup, but 98.6% of assets managed are managed by my white male brothers. And but they are 49% of the population when you look at our country's demographics. And so for those of you who don't know, a venture capitalist has money. They have resources. They invested in a business to help the business grow. That business creates jobs, products, and things that we all need. Well, if they don't have enough capital, then they can't help the businesses. And if the businesses are struggling, how are they creating jobs and producing the products? And so we have been on a mission to get more capital in the hands of investors in venture, private equity, and other asset classes. And the reason that is important is because our country is a beautifully diverse country. 43% are folks of color. And we continue to grow and to thrive and to build and to do all of these amazing things. But if we don't have the capital to move in our economy, we're all going to be stuck. And so at Black Grvty, one of the ways that we're trying to support fund managers is by providing working capital. We have an initiative that says, there are fund managers who can get into really cool programs like emerging managers. I'm a first-time fund manager. I'm trying to learn the field. All right. So there are lots of resources and things like that that are available. But what happens is they fall off a cliff if they're not supported from Fund 1 to Fund 2 to Fund 3 to Fund 4. I have worked in private equity, and they started $350 million and we're at $4 billion over the course of 4 or 5 funds, right? Our folks are targeting 50 million for a first fund, and they're raising 3 or 5, maybe 10. And they can't live off of that. You can't actually create wealth off of that. You can't really support your family off of that. You have to have multiple jobs. And then you have a bunch of people who are your investors writing small checks. And so now you have a bunch of masters while you're actually trying to support businesses getting started. That's actually not, it's just not sustainable. It doesn't make sense. But imagine if you had smart investors that represented the people of our country, finding good businesses like the folks out here in this audience, getting capital into the hands of the business in partnership with government, in partnership with philanthropy. Do you understand what we can do as an economy? And see, that's the thing. There's a bunch of noise about Black and brown and female and all this other stuff. People are creating chaos. It's unnecessary. We're Americans. We're humans. We want the best for our economy. And so Black Grvty is committed to figuring out how to support those who have been historically excluded, get them in the game so that they can participate and get money to folks like you in this audience. And we can get this thing going here in America. So.
And one of the parts of the narrative that frequently gets lost, and you flagged this, there's just money being left on the table.
On the table.
Right. And when we sit back and we think about concerns of growth within the US and simultaneously, if these are charity it's not charity.
No.
It's fundamentally just, it's pure economics. It's viable businesses that just don't have the support that they need. So, I mean, Heather, you made the joke that people don't like to see you coming with respect to your work. I would say right now, given your expertise, there's probably a ton of people who love to see you coming, right? And just wanted to understand kind of the legal implications that kind of the recent Fearless Fund decision has on initiatives, specifically focused on serving underrepresented founders and how it might influence kind of future programs aimed at advancing them with respect to entrepreneurship. Just would love your take on that.
Sure. I think one thing that it's important to realize is to think about what has changed, which was with respect to the law nationwide, and what hasn't. So if we rewind to what seems like 1,000 years ago to me, but was only 2023, that was when the Supreme Court decision on the Students for Fair Admissions came out. And that eliminated the use of race as a consideration in higher education admissions. That case had absolutely nothing to do with private sector DEI programs. The law didn't change there. And that is still the case, even in light of the Fearless Fund decision. Now that settled yesterday, and it settled because the Fearless Fund did away with the Strivers Grant program, which was the $20,000 grant. There's more to it than just that, but the target audience was Black women-owned businesses. And that settlement is somewhat bittersweet in the sense that, one, that litigation is over. And even when you read some of the news coming out and the statements being put out by Fearless Fund, their lawyers and others, part of their calculus was that they did not want their program to be the vehicle to create law that would dampen and harm programs like that for generations to come. What has changed, however, is the litigation risk around some of these programs. Since Students for Fair Admissions, there has just been seemingly an avalanche of litigation attacking every aspect of DE&I programs. So not just hiring, not just grants or promotions, we're talking about trainings, basically anything you can think of. And so those lawsuits are being used as a weapon. And what it really comes down to for organizations who are committed to these issues, and it's not different from any other aspect of a business or an organization, is your risk tolerance. And how far you're willing to go and how much you're willing to think about, on some level, the long game, which I do think played a factor in the Fearless Fund settlement. Right now, that case didn't ever get to the point where it said that that grant program violated Section 1981 of the Civil Rights Act. It didn't get that far. There wasn't a fully developed factual record. What the 11th Circuit said was simply that the organization was prohibited from awarding the grant during the pendency of the litigation. That's what it said. And that's the law in the 11th Circuit right now, which impacts Georgia, Florida, and I believe Alabama. And I'm not trying to minimize the impact and the harm that just the threat of all this litigation can do. I'm just trying to contextualize it because sometimes the two things get conflated with respect to what is the law and what are the risks associated with programs that give preferences based on things like race or gender or sexual orientation, et cetera.
And I think I love the fact that you broke it down into the two distinct items. There's a potential and risk associated with litigation, and then there's the law. And in many of these cases, there's not a direct correlation, right? There are people who are literally out there filing lawsuits just to drag an organization into an almost seemingly endless and very, very costly process. So I think particularly for us, it's important for us to keep that narrative and make sure that other people understand it, because I feel not enough people do. And we'll do lightning round, and just wanted to get a sense from all of you, given some of the recent challenges to DEI initiatives, how can we reimagine or adapt strategies to ensure that women and people of color continue to receive the support that they need?
So I always make sure I preface this by saying I am not a lawyer and I leave lawyering to lawyers. However, when we talk about strategies, first and foremost, we have to make sure people are counted and their experiences are known. And so in that work, we've actually been pushing forward what we're calling our Statistical Policy Directive 15, SPD 15. We're super proud of it in the federal government. But we're actually beginning to break down various racial categories in your census and other documents. So soon, if you are Middle Eastern, if you are North African, for instance, you can actually indicate that. Moreover, if you are, let's say, Cambodian or Chinese, that can be broken out as well, instead of just being wrapped up in that Asian demographic. That's important. That's the beginning. But the other part is that, frankly, we need individual stories. When you look at Brown versus Board of Education, a lot of people, those who are familiar with the story, know that there were the litigants and there was Ruby, right? And there were their individual stories that actually were brought before the court that helped push those forward. And I think what's been going on in our world today is that discrimination and instances of bias are so commonplace that people don't actually understand that this is not normal. It is not normal for me to go to the bank, have a good credit score, and be turned away seemingly for no other reason than because I am Black or because I live in a zip code predominantly Hispanic. That's not normal. But a lot of people don't know the process by which to advocate for themselves and by which to record those instances. So that's really important to what the work we're doing. And we're continuing to work. In fact, we're increasing funding to our offices of civil rights across the federal government in light of that as well. And I encourage all of you to be clear, if you believe you've had an instance where where it's a violation of your civil rights, I encourage you to pursue an outcome for yourself. This work, we need individuals to stand up. because we do know that discrimination is still very real. So that's 1, 2, 3, maybe. I have just one last thing I'll say in terms of what we're trying to do. And the other work really just comes back to representation. So when President Biden, for his very first day in office, he signed what's called the Equity Order, Equity Executive Order. And he made this commitment that our federal government will deliver programs and policies and procedures in a way that ensures everyone gets served equally. This was profound work to do. And I think what's so awesome about it is that he followed it up with an DEIA order, making sure that his federal government looked like and reflected America. And so as we continue to do this good work, I want to also encourage all of you to recognize the power of representation. Continue to, of course, look at your own staff, your own teams, but always asking yourself, are there individuals that should be in the room that are not in the room for no other reason because I didn't invite them, not that they didn't earn to be there. So those are my comments.
I'll just add, don't believe the hype. Shut off the noise. Like, don't believe the hype. We need a paradigm shift in our beliefs and our behaviors. And that, like, the first thing, just believe that we are better together. Just believe that scarcity is like a trick. Believe in our abundance and our ability. Don't believe the hype. There are some media, we talked about it last in the back, that are part of the fourth estate. And so their job is to continue to create chaos. Don't believe the hype.
That's good. I don't know why I wasn't going after you and your applause. I am a lawyer, but your comment made me say, I am not providing you with legal advice and I am not your lawyer. So we'll call these some considerations for people who do want to think about kind of, are there ways to still stay true to the mission, but also kind of de-risk? And I'm about to throw out some terminology that I didn't come up with. There's some very smart people at NYU Law School who are like up to their neck in this and have done a lot of thought. And so one of the ideas that people have is to go from the idea of a cohort to content. And that means if you are trying to help or support a specific population, maybe instead of expressly limiting whatever the opportunity is to people who identify as a certain race or a certain gender, instead, maybe you focus on how do we identify and support people who support our mission, who share those values, who are doing work that will benefit communities that we care about. The other thing, and this one actually did come out of the Students for Fair Admissions case, is the idea of moving from cohort to character. And so those of you who are extra nerdy and did a lot of reading might have realized that there was, I believe, a footnote in the affirmative action case where they said that, no, you can no longer consider the candidate's race. But if they write an essay where they talk about how their race has impacted their life, you can consider that. And that is another, just a different lens to think about it, is the way that I sort of focus on it. And it is also still perfectly legal to do really, really targeted outreach. So if you want to support a particular community, there is nothing stopping you from pounding the pavement and doing everything you can to make sure that the people you want to help know about the program that you are offering.
I just want to say thank you, and I want to wrap this up with the feedback that you provided, right? Tell your story, don't believe the hype. And Heather did not in fact provide you with legal advice, but gave you a lot of insight as to where to look and things that you can do.
Considerations.
All right? Exactly. So thank you all.
Thank you.